Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, "You are too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power."
Bow, 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 bow.
Hotep, which in the language of ancient Egypt means we come with justice and peace. Welcome to Freedom Now, a Saturday Pan-Africanist and Internationalist World Affairs program. Freedom Now is committed to the principle of the rights of all peoples and nations to self-determination. We thank you deeply for your contribution to KPFK, which permits programs like Freedom Now to stay on the air. In this era of corporate acquisition and co-optation of all dissident media, we provide the microphone, challenging their corporate and racist point of view. So stay tuned for Agenda here at Freedom Now.
Habarigani. This is Sister Thade with Freedom Now's agenda for this Saturday, November 1st, 2025. From Tongvaland here in Los Angeles, our central theme for today is the long arc of Black freedom, from Maroon Resistance to global liberation. From the hills of Jamaica to the streets of New Orleans, from Addis Ababa to Harlem, the struggle for Black freedom has always been global. African ancestors fled plantations and built Maroon societies, laboratories of self-determination. And today, in boardrooms and hospitals, at summits from CARICOM to the African Union, that same spirit, the Maroon Impulse, beats on. As empire reconfigures itself through global health policy, finance, and migration, what does freedom look like now? What does sovereignty mean for our bodies, nations, and people in the 21st century? Here on Freedom Now, we speak with those who are pushing the boundaries of liberation thought. This hour, prolific author, radical historian, professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston, and Freedom Now co-producer, Dr. Gerald Horne interviews Amari Rebel, writer, artist, filmmaker, and musician, here to discuss his book, Under a Black Star, The Maroon Impulse in New Orleans. Then, Dr. Horne interviews Dr. Denise Lynn, professor and chair of the History Department at the University of Southern Indiana, here to discuss her book, Women March for Peace, Black Radical Women's Anti-Korean War Activism. And to close out this radical hour of Freedom Now Power, we're honored to welcome back to Freedom Now another Black radical woman in the 21st century, Dr. Mary T. Bassett. Dr. Gerald Horne interviews her. She is the director of the FXB Professor of the Practice of Health and Human Rights at Harvard University, here to discuss her recent attendance at the African Union-CARICOM Summit that happened in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia on September 7th, where she was with colleagues from UC Berkeley. We want to shout out and extend our solidarity to those in Washington, D.C. who attended this morning's the Black People's March that's organized by the Blackest Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. There is a conference through November 3rd, and you can visit blackestbackcoalition.org for more information. Our music clip mix includes MLK, Zap Mama, Alice Coltrane, Black Star, Nina Simone, Akon, and Mulatu Estake. So sit back, phone a friend, and as always, we stand ready for revolution.
For KPFK Radio, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Amari Rebel, writer, artist, filmmaker, musician, and author of the book Under a Black Star, The Maroon Impulse in New Orleans. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Amari Rebel.
Thank you for having me.
So why did you write this book? And while responding, tell us, what is the Maroon Impulse?
Sure. You know, this study really grew out of a commitment of mine towards the health, well-being, and liberation of global African people. I mean, it came on my heart and my mind when I was in high school, and I've really been looking to the Maroons as an example. The Maroons being those Africans who escaped the plantation in order to create autonomous and independent communities elsewhere. And I think that an important distinction that I make in the book is that it wasn't about escape as much as it was about pursuit, the pursuit of freedom, the pursuit of life. So this book is really an exploration of that concept of Maroonage, and more specifically the Maroon Impulse, through the community in New Orleans in the years following Hurricane Katrina, that I've named the Black Star community, which was organized around two twin institutions, the Black Star Books and Cafe and Kamali Academy, which was a homeschool collective that operated out of my house. It was my roommate was the director of that school.
And what role does Hurricane Katrina play in your story? And of course, for the youth in our audience, what was Hurricane Katrina?
I describe this book in part an ethnographic memoir. So I'm talking about a community that I was very much involved in, but I also talk about how I arrived there. So Hurricane Katrina in late August 28th of 2005, really awakened my imagination to the need for something else, not in a distant future, but here and now. So I remember I talked earlier in the book in the introduction about sitting on my grandfather's couch in North Carolina as we watched it play out. And this was the summer, this was a few days before my senior year in college. I went to school in New York City, and we were watching the news for days show floating bodies, floating black bodies on television. We were watching black people stuck on roofs. And I was asking myself, well, how is it that they can get news crews down here, but evacuation crews or, emergency support crews are absent? And after, there was a telethon, and everyone talks about this Kanye West said that he looked at the screen and he said, George Bush does not care about black people, and everybody was taken aback. And my thing was, yes, you should be taken aback, not because he said it, but because of how true it is, right? That the foreign and domestic policies of the Bush administration and the U.S. government writ large underlie that reality, which is that we are alone. We are, as in some ways we call it an outdated way of thinking, we are a colonized nation within a nation. So this was all the sort of thinking that was happening, and Katrina was evidence, explicit evidence in real time about that. So I returned to New York for my senior year in college. I joined an organization that was calling for the self-determination of the Black nation, and my first project that I was put on was helping displaced residents of New Orleans who had been displaced to New York, as FEMA was trying to cut the funding and basically kick them out onto the streets. So that's really what led me to this through Hurricane Katrina.
So tell us more about Black Star Books.
So Black Star Books and Cafe was a gathering place, right? It was started by Bakir Tayahembe, and a group of us were involved in converting what was formerly a hair salon into what would become a bookstore and cafe, but like I said, more specifically, a gathering place for Black people. Now, one of the things I think is really important is, one, it was located on Algiers, in Algiers, which is on the west bank of the Mississippi River. It is New Orleans' only neighborhood on the west bank. And I talk about that significantly, and it's important, its importance in the book, not only because, one, it's above sea level, so it wasn't impacted the same way that the rest of the city was, but number two, because of its history for Black resistance, and particularly the Maroonage. But Black Star was, for us, like I said, a gathering place. It was where we could come for, vegan brunches, where we could come for book clubs and study groups and movie nights. But the sort of crowning jewel was an open mic that happened every Sunday called Liberation Lounge, which was our attempt at recreating Fela Kuti's shrine, African shrine, or the Black Lily in Philadelphia, but it was really using sound and movement as a way of advancing liberation.
Speaking of which, talk to us about your artistry in music and film.
So I've been playing guitar since I was a child, and it is, for me, an instrument of liberation. I always think about John Henrik Clarke, who said, let everything you touch be converted to an instrument of liberation or be thrown into the ash can of history. And music is that impulse that can move us to where it is that we want to go. It can help us transcend both space and time, and it can draw us together like no other artistic force was. For me, film is an extension of that. So the type of music that I make, I call it solar rock, SOULARROCK. It is the best of African musical traditions, really drawing on the philosophical inspiration of Sun Ra, who says that my kingdom is the kingdom of darkness and blackness. None can enter but those who are of black spirit, right? It is the freedom music. It is a soundscape for advancing, like I say, the health, well-being, and liberation of global African people. And film is an extension of that to really capture us in our best light, in an honest light that tells stories that are transformational.
What forms might the Maroon Impulse take in the 21st century?
One of the things that I argue in the book is that Maroonage is a process. It is an African cultural continuum, and it does not have to result strictly in a quote-unquote Maroon community. But by identifying Maroonage as a process, and as a process that entails escape, flight, and re-engagement, that the outcome does not necessarily have to be Nanny Town in Jamaica, or Palmares in Brazil, or San Basilio in Colombia, right? That it can take different forms. It could be underground study groups. It could be the Black Liberation Army. It could be collective farm collectives, right? Community farms where people are coming together to meet their needs. And it's all driven by what I argue, or what I call the Maroon Impulse, which is a shared and acted upon drive to create and maintain beneficial forms of autonomous community. So that's by generally abstracting oneself from vexed social, political, or cultural arrangements. And that the Maroon Impulse is present across, and this is, to me, the key point is that it's present across the African diaspora. At any time that African people are met with oppressive social orders, there is a Maroon Impulse that drives us to organize ourselves and commit to a communal well-being. So in the 21st century, like I said, that could be study groups, it could be housing cooperatives, there's a number of iterations, but all are one, communal in nature, and two, intent on collective well-being.
Mm-hmm. In that light, what's next on the agenda of Amari Rebel?
I am continuing to work on music. So I have some projects that are coming out. We have, I'm based in Philadelphia, we have a monthly event called The Gathering, which is an attempt to create a space for us to come together and exist, but also to advance a larger collective liberation. And then in terms of film, I'm finishing up a documentary called The Full Never Told, about the Dread Act period on the Caribbean island of Dominica, where the government actively pursued the growing Rastafari movement by, imprisoning anyone who was associated with the Rastafari movement. It was a particularly violent period that lasted for about 4 years. Many would argue that the sort of downpression that still plays on Rastafari people on the island continues till this day, but the documentary is exploring that.
Might I suggest you submit it to the Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles?
Oh, absolutely. That's the intention.
Right on. So how can our audience reach Amari Rebel?
You can reach me online. The website is amarirebel.com, AMARIREBEL, or on all relevant social media, AMARIREBEL. I have a weekly series called Solar Rock Radio, which is an exploration of the sounds of Black music across space and time. That's on YouTube.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Amari Rebel, author of the book Under a Black Star, The Maroon Impulse in New Orleans. But thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
It's great to be here.
For KPFK Radio, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Denise Lynn, professor and chair of the History Department and director of Gender and Sexuality Studies and Africana Studies at the University of Southern Indiana, and author of the book Women March for Peace, Black Radical Women's Anti-Korean War Activism. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Denise Lynn.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So why did you write this book?
Well, I've been studying Claudia Jones for over 20 years at this point, and in my examination of her life, as I dug deeper into her own writing, the Korean War kept emerging as a theme, and of course her comrades like Eula Richardson, Louise Thompson Patterson, Carlotta Bass, and Eslanda Robeson. And these women all were opposed to the Cold War and American anti-communism. And that during the Korean War, they began actively agitating against American anti-communism and the Korean War. And honestly, I think most Americans didn't realize that there were a lot of loud voices opposed to the Korean War. There's not a lot of conversation about that war in general, but there's very little conversation about the people that opposed it. And part of the reason for that is that they were hounded by the anti-communist police state in those early Cold War years. And I also wrote a lot of blogs for the Black Perspectives website, which is through the African American Intellectual History Society. And someone actually said to me once, "Are you going to write a book about these blogs?" And it never really occurred to me to put it all together into a book length until that person asked me that. And so I dug a little bit deeper into their Korean War activism and wrote the book.
So this war in its hottest phase was between 1950 and 1953. And during that period, a prominent Angelino, who you mentioned, speaking of Charlotta Bass, was heavily involved in these protests.
Right.
Who was she, and what role does she play in your book?
Yeah, so Carlotta Bass is a really interesting person. She went to California in the early part of the 20th century because she was ordered to go somewhere dry because she had health issues, and she needed to find work. So she started working for Joseph Nemours' The Eagle, which was one of the first Black newspapers in California. This one was located in Los Angeles, which was a city in its infancy in this time period. And Joseph Nemours handed her the reins of the newspaper when he passed away. So she became its editor-in-chief between 1913 to about 1952. So she used the newspaper to become a center for political activism for civil rights in Los Angeles. So, for example, when the movie Birth of a Nation was released, there was a lot of protest against it, and she organized against its production. Before it even was released to movie theaters, she organized against its production in the Los Angeles, Hollywood area. She also worked on integrating the nursing profession in nearby hospitals. She faced off with the California Ku Klux Klan. So she was a well-known civil rights activist in Los Angeles. She also was very active in the Republican Party, but eventually she realized that neither of the mainstream political parties would be the voice for Black America. And so in 1948, during Henry Wallace's campaign for president on the Progressive Party ticket, she became extremely active in the Progressive Party. So she helped to get Henry Wallace on the California ballot. She worked to organize voter registration. She brought Henry Wallace to Los Angeles to speak. She also organized Paul Robeson's concert in support of Henry Wallace's campaign in 1948. So she was extremely active in the Progressive Party, and eventually in 1950, the party asked her to run for the congressional district. And she did lose that election. And then in 1952, she ran as vice president on the Progressive Party ticket with Vincent Hallinan, who was a prominent attorney in that area. So she was a very prominent Californian who was the center of a lot of civil rights activism in Los Angeles.
And you also write about Lorraine Hansberry, the prominent playwright and writer. We're all familiar with her famous Broadway drama, Raisin in the Sun, also converted into a film. What do you have to say about Lorraine Hansberry?
Yeah, Lorraine Hansberry is a very interesting person. She was very close to a lot of the women in this book. She was a roommate of Claudia Jones. She was a reporter for Paul Robeson's magazine Freedom. She was friends with Shirley Graham Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois's second wife. She worked with Carlotta Bass and Shirley Graham Du Bois and Zalonda Robeson, Beulah Richardson and Louise Thompson Patterson in the Sojourners for Truth and Justice, which was a Black women's organization that was founded in 1951. She was very briefly in the Communist Party, but did not remain a member. She does work on the 1948 Henry Wallace campaign. She was a college student at the time, so she was in the Young Progressives of America and described herself as 100% progressive. She works as a journalist during the Korean War, and she works as a journalist for Paul Robeson's paper, as I mentioned, Freedom. And when Paul Robeson's passport was seized by the federal government, she travels to a conference, a peace conference in Montevideo, and gives Paul Robeson's speech because, you know, he's not allowed to travel. And then when she returns, she gets her passport taken away. She was a very outspoken anti-Cold War activist and anti-Korean War activist.
You mentioned Beulah Richardson, and
Right.
many in our audience may be familiar with her, given her long residence in the City of the Angels, given the fact that contemporary actor and artist and activist Lisa Gay Hamilton did a marvelous documentary about her life. But what role does Richardson play in your pages?
Beulah Richardson's a very interesting person. A lot of people might know of her as Bay Richards. That was her screen and stage name. And she was in such popular shows as ER, if people remember the 1990s television show ER. She was in the film adaptation of Beloved. She was in Sanford and Sons. She had a very successful career as on Broadway. But most people don't really know that she was also a writer and activist in the 1940s, 1950s. She moves to California in 1948. She meets Louise and William Patterson, who are both prominent communists and activists. And eventually they will all end up in New York City. Bay Richards actually will live with the Pattersons at one point. And she writes a poem that has been credited with inspiring the founder of that organization I already mentioned, the Sojourners for Truth and Justice. And she was an activist and co-founder of this organization. And they worked on anti-lynching. They wanted to get rid of the poll tax. They advocated integration. But for the purposes of my book, they were also deeply opposed to the Korean War, and one of the things that she wrote about in her poem was the hypocrisy of a country that did not practice democracy, having Black Americans fight an undemocratic war in Korea. And so she wrote that poem that helped inspire the founding of that organization. And then she also worked on the We Charge Genocide petition, which William Patterson compiled. She wrote a poem called Genocide, and the poem was acted out at the release of the We Charge Genocide petition. And the We Charge Genocide petition essentially accused the United States government of genocide against Black America. So Beulah Richardson was a well-known and very active activist in this time period.
So you mentioned Claudia Jones more than once. So what can you
Mhm.
tell us about Claudia Jones? Not only what role she plays in your book, but also her role in politics more generally.
Right. I think Claudia Jones is maybe one of the least well known, but one of the more important leaders of the American Communist Party. As far as I'm concerned, my research has focused a lot on Claudia Jones, and overall, I'm trying to make the argument and trying to convince people that she was an important leader in the Communist Party, not just among Black women radicals. She was a theorist. She basically had a high school education, but she wrote a lot of theory challenging the Marxist Leninist tradition and its class focused and largely shop floor focused understanding of the struggles of the working people. She was a prominent leader of the American Communist Party basically from 1936 until she is eventually deported in 1955. She's deported in part because of her anti-Korean War activism, but also, of course, because she is a prominent Black radical. The United States government accuses her of trying to violently overthrow the government, and she serves about 10 months in jail and is fined $2,000. And then December 1955, she is deported to London. Claudia Jones was originally born in Trinidad, which was a colony of the British, and so she is deported to London. The speculation is because the British didn't want to send her back to its colony so that she wouldn't organize there. But she goes to London and she ends up organizing the Carnival celebration, which is still celebrated to this day. She starts a Black newspaper called the West Indian Gazette, which has a run of at least about 8 years, but it is an important newspaper and information about the Black freedom struggle globally. And so Claudia Jones is one of these important leaders that has gone unrecognized, especially in the United States.
Were these women harassed by the United States government in light of their activism?
Absolutely. So my final chapter in the book talks about the harassment that each of the women in the book faced. And I already mentioned Claudia Jones was arrested under the Smith Act, which basically accuses people of trying to violently overthrow the United States government. She's convicted. She's sentenced to 1 year in prison. She serves 10 months and is released 2 months early because of good behavior. And then she's deported. She's deported to a country she's never lived in. She's deported away from her entire family. And her legal struggles lasted from her first arrest in 1948 until her deportation in 1955. I already mentioned Lorraine Hansberry. She has a pretty lengthy FBI file. The FBI will follow her entire political career until she dies at a very young age, at 34. They even send agents to go to her play, A Raisin in the Sun, to see if it was communist inspired. Her FBI file shows that the FBI followed her on dog walks. They looked at everything she read. They followed all of her travels. The same thing was true for Carlotta Bass. She was followed for many years. Her FBI file is really interesting to me because she dies in 1969, but her FBI file is not closed until the 1990s, nearly 20 years after she dies, because the FBI assumed that her estate was being donated to the Communist Party. So they monitored her estate nearly 20 years after her death. Beulah Richardson was also monitored regularly. She lived with the Pattersons, as I mentioned, and so that was used as an excuse to keep her FBI file open. And Louise Thompson Patterson was a proud Communist Party member, and she and her husband, William Patterson, will both be monitored and harassed. And these individuals faced a lot of financial issues as a result of that. A lot of individuals kept their distance from them because of that. Shirley Graham Du Bois lost her passport, and then she left the country and eventually found that she wasn't even allowed back in the country. So they faced a lot of legal repercussions.
Legal repercussions indeed, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Denise Lynn, author of the book Women March for Peace, Black Radical Women's Anti-Korean War Activism. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thank you.
This is Sister Flora, and you are listening to Freedom Now at KPFK 90.7 FM in occupied Mexico, including Los Angeles, 98.7 FM Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM in San Diego, and streaming live on the web at kpfk.org. Today's program, as well as 10 prior editions, can be reheard at kpfk.org/audio archive, and scroll down to Freedom Now. From 12 to 1 p.m., following Freedom Now is our sister Assumpta, with Spotlight Africa addressing issues facing Mother Africa. For a truly alternative international perspective on world affairs, check out RTTV Russia, CCTV China, and online at Presna, Latina Cuba Telesur Venezuela, News 24 South Africa, and Press TV Iran.
Muhammad Ahmad and the Black Freedom Struggle. His name is Muhammad Ahmad. And if this name doesn't ring a bell, well, don't be surprised, for it indicates how media has supported the civil rights movement while ignoring and downplaying the Black liberation movement. Dr. Muhammad Ahmad, a celebrated scholar activist, has had a long and impressive history as a member of RAM, the Revolutionary Action Movement, the chairman of the African People's Party, APP, and for over 5 years, a Black political prisoner in Philadelphia, New York City, and San Diego, California. He supported the pre-Newton formations of the Black Panther Party, the group mostly based on the East Coast, as well as the Republic of New Africa, RNA, which fought for the separation of 5 southern states for Black settlement as a land base for an independent Black nation. RAM, which operated in Philadelphia and New York City, named Robert Williams, formerly of the NAACP chapter in Monroe, North Carolina, its president in exile, while Williams lived in Cuba and later China. Dr. Muhammad Ahmad's own book, which I believe was titled Look for Me in the Whirlwind, is a delightful telling of him growing up in West Philadelphia, where the now legendary figure, Queen Mother Moore, became one of his teachers and allowed him to use her extensive library for study and research. Dr. Ahmad taught for years at Temple and lived more history than is often written in books. We applaud him for his significant role in our freedom struggle for freedom and independence for Black people. With love, not fear, this is Mumia Abu Jamal.
These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.
will now continue with historian Professor Dr. Gerald Horne.
For KPFK Pacifica Radio, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Mary T. Bassett, Director of the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights and FXB Professor of the Practice of Health and Human Rights at Harvard University. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Mary T. Bassett.
Thanks for having me.
So you recently attended the historic summit in Ethiopia between leaders of the African Union and the Caribbean community. Why did you attend, and what was the highlight of your visit?
Well, yes, I attended the second AU Africa CARICOM Summit. It was held on September 7th of this year in Addis Ababa. Just stepping back, I work in public health, and one of the enduring observations of population patterns of health in the United States, and in fact elsewhere, is the shorter lives and sicker health of people of African descent. So I've long been concerned with this health gap, and increasingly people in the field are connecting it to the legacy of enslavement and the fact that that this labor went both unrecognized and unpaid when the enslaved were so-called freed. So I went there because I've been interested in the idea that reparations for African enslavement represent a potentially important public health intervention. And I was interested in the extent to which the broader community, particularly the African Union and the CARICOM, which represents Caribbean states, have embraced this issue. So it was a real honor to be there and to witness the deliberations on this topic.
And what would you say was the highlight?
I guess that the highlight for me as somebody who lives in the United States and travels on a U.S. passport was the fact that this meeting took place, that the African Union, which represents all of the African member states of the UN, plus what Morocco rules as the Western Sahara, and the CARICOM, which I believe has 15 member states, that they got together for the second time on the topic of reparations. And just to be present in Nelson Mandela Hall in Addis Ababa, and the fact that despite the current political context, these nations continue to work on this idea, which in the United States has become, to describe it as marginalized is an understatement. That really was a highlight. I will probably get to what the final declarations were at the end of the meeting, but I guess I can go ahead and say that there were no specific plans of how to go forward with the idea of reparations. But there was a plan to meet again in 2028. This time it will be in a Caribbean nation. And there was a reiteration of the commitment to the idea that the harms to Africa and the Atlantic world needed to be redressed, meaning the Caribbean as well as the diaspora.
So other than the African Union and CARICOM, were there other representatives of international bodies and or states present?
Well, international bodies, there were. The IMF, the World Bank, various UN agencies, including the UN Fund for Population, UNICEF, and others, had seats as observers in the Nelson Mandela Auditorium. The CARICOM Commission on Reparations had a seat and a placard. I and the other two people who accompanied me were credentialed as so-called special guests. And we got that credentialing through the efforts of the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the team at the University of California at Berkeley, which had been working to get representation at the meeting. So I didn't see any evidence, for example, that of the presence of nations, but they may have been there. They had no speaking role, and they were present only at the opening session. After the opening session, the session was closed to member states of the CARICOM and the African Union, and including some of the special guests, including the CARICOM Reparations Commission members, led by Hilary Beckles.
So you mentioned in your previous response that there were two other representatives whose presence was facilitated by the University of California at Berkeley.
Yes.
Could you speak to the wider question of African American representation or the absence thereof?
Well, we met there, Ron Daniels and Cam Howard, who were invited to sit with the Caribbean Commission on Reparations in their section in the audience. But otherwise, it was just the three of us. And I guess it speaks to the fact that of the difficulties in figuring out how to involve the diaspora when that population constitutes a minority, which is not the case in the Caribbean nations. So it's just difficult to figure out how to have a formal representation of people of African descent or descendants of the enslaved from the Americas. But we were really grateful that through the good offices of people who had been building these ties at UC Berkeley and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ethiopia was a host of the meeting, that we were able to get this credentialing. So there was a small contingent. I think we all felt that it had been a positive thing that we were present, but it did raise for me, the difficulty. I think the AU declared it's been going on 20 years ago, I think it was in 2008, that the diaspora, that means descendants of the enslaved who were kidnapped and trafficked around the world, constituted the sixth region of Africa. But how to engage with that sixth region on a structural basis is something that's still being worked out.
Now, I understand as well that other than reparations, alteration of the obtaining international financial system was also on the agenda. Why was that on the agenda, and was there any movement in that regard?
Well, that's a really important question, because there's been, a lot of agitation around the debt, the unpayable debt that many African nations bear, and for example, Haiti bears. So this has been a principal issue, I would say, and this is just my opinion. I don't claim to be an expert in the area, that the African nations really were more focused on the unfairness of the international finance system and the needs for its reform, the need for reform to the UN, where there's no African representation on the Security Council, and the whole kind of terms of trade problem, and the fact that the net movement of resources and capital is out of Africa despite this terrible debt. So that's what many African countries spoke to. But the Caribbean has also been involved in that conversation. But reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, I would say, was more often raised by the representatives of the Caribbean members of CARICOM. And there was high-level representation at this meeting. I think that's another important point. The first meeting was held during COVID, so it was a virtual meeting in 2021. That's when September 7th became Africa CARICOM Day. But at that meeting had several African heads of state who spoke. At this meeting, there was the president of Angola, the prime minister of several Caribbean countries, including Mia Mottley, who's been outspoken on both issues of the international financial system and reparations, was present. And when the head of state or government wasn't present, it was typically the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So there was very high-level representation at the meeting, and both issues were really highlighted. In the final communique, we'll see whether it departs at all from the draft communique, but that was passed without any dissent. So I expect that it will be the draft communique represents the final communique, and it spent a lot of time on the need to increase trade between the regions. They cited that only 6% of exports between the regions are from each other, the need to reduce barriers to trade, and the need to reduce barriers to travel. So many of these issues about economic cooperation were there, as well as the question of reparations for the enduring impact of the transatlantic slave trade.
What about people-to-people issues? For example, visa-free travel, educational and cultural exchanges between the African Union and CARICOM. Did those issues arise?
Yes, they did. And I think that they were addressed perhaps more explicitly. And also, there's something called the Africa Export-Import Bank. They opened an office in Barbados just a couple years ago, I think in 2023. So that these sort of economic exchanges, I can't remember which country it was, but somewhere in the Caribbean now has a direct flight to somewhere in West Africa. And there was an expression of the need for more, routes of transportation, for easing visa restrictions. These featured prominently in the final draft communique. I think that some of those are, I don't know whether you would call them people to people, but they include certainly the private sector, the academic and health institutions. There was mention, for example, of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is actually headquartered in Addis Ababa. The need to strengthen regional capacity to handle medical emergencies. All of these really occupied a lot of the conversation that took place at the first CARICOM Africa Summit in September of 2021, which was during the COVID pandemic. So the idea of increasing collaboration around technology and innovation, education, all of these are noted in the communique. Climate change, actually directly following on the Africa CARICOM Summit for reparations for Africans and people of African descent. Directly following on that meeting was another meeting on climate change, and that involved both regions' member states. So there was also a recognition of the importance of working together around climate change, which of course the brunt of which will be borne by many of the member states of both regions.
Now, headlines have been replete with stories about cooperation between Ethiopia and China. When you were in Addis Ababa, did you get any indication of such development?
Well, to be honest, I wasn't looking. This is a one-day meeting, so it was a short visit. And I mean, obviously, there's widespread engagement between China and many countries in Africa. I don't know if they were involved with the building of the dam which that is called the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and it was officially opened just a couple days after the September 7th summit. But no, I don't. I didn't see it. Certainly, I didn't see it at the meeting itself, which was the people who spoke at this meeting were all representatives of the member states. And it's, these are very formal meetings. People speak from prepared texts, and you can see the opening session is available online now. We didn't see debate and discussion. I'm sure that happened. It may have happened in earlier meetings in the run-up to the September 7th meeting, or it happened behind closed doors in other settings. And there certainly wasn't an idea that other entities than the member states of the AU and the CARICOM had a prominent role in this meeting. They weren't present.
And of course, the aforementioned Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, spoke at the unveiling of the Renaissance Dam, and that too can be found online. But finally, Mary T. Bassett, director of the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard University, a dual question: how can we find out more about your center, and when do you expect the final communique will be issued?
Well, the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights has a website that you can find by Googling it or using some search engine to find the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard University. My own area of work these days is looking at how monetary reparations for African enslavement would extend life and reduce premature mortality in the population of African descent in the United States. But we have other areas of activity. We have a program on Palestine, a program on distressed migration, and so on. So please, I'd be interested to have people take a look. And the final statement I thought would be posted by now. The draft communique was approved at the end of the closed session. As I understand it, no one raised any concerns, and there was no discussion. There was a hope that there might be some kind of interim meeting before the 2028 meeting, and a hope that there would be allocation of resources for the Secretariat for this effort. And I expected the final thing to be posted, but it hasn't been posted yet. So you have to look at the African Union website. The St. Vincent's Times, or a newspaper from St. Vincent's, published the draft communique in full, and you can find that online.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, Mary T.
Thank you.
But thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
And up next, we're going to hear a clip of Muhammad Ali running into Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. They're at Howard University, speaking with a reporter.
But all the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is doing is giving America a chance to do right. One Negro says he won't integrate, he gets killed. One Negro says, I want to separate, he gets killed. So this shows America up as being a hypocrite and not wanting to really do right by the slave, because the Muslims are catching more hell for not wanting to integrate than the other people are catching for integrating. So this justifies God when he comes to destroy a people. He gave them a chance to do right. So America's been offered separation or integration, and she don't want either. So Allah will have to come in and intercede and make it. Stokely Carmichael, come here, man. Come here, man. Come here, man. Come here, man. My man. My man. My man. My man. Hey, we have a surprise guest. We have a surprise guest today.
You were saying a little earlier you didn't agree with Stokely's philosophy. In what ways don't you agree?
I haven't said nothing about I didn't agree with Stokely's philosophy. I said we are all black brothers. I also said that whites try to divide and conquer us. This man is fighting and doing what he believes is right, and he's sincere in getting his people freedom. I'm doing what I believe. Our approaches may be different, but the same common enemy has her like you.
Would you go along with that, Stokely?
Yes, would you go along with that? Ain't that some
You talking to me? I don't know what you want to say.
One man, one people. That's right. We all together. Right on. The same dog bit me, bit him.
How do you feel about some of the other black philosophies?
All of them are my brothers.
This March on Washington, for instance, will it do
Rabbi
anything?
Abernathy is a good friend of mine, and he's doing what he believes will get his people free. See, we have different approaches to win this battle. In Vietnam, America's at war. One man fights in the air, one man fights on the land, one man fights on the water, one is a spy. They have different approaches, but they fight different. So we have different approaches, but the same common enemy is white America. He gives them hell his way. I raise hell my way. Abernathy raised hell his way, and you got to answer to somebody, and we're going to win anyway.
I know how you feel.
Slip up on me like that. Where'd you come from?
I was thinking you, because you still my champ.
They haven't whipped me yet. How long you going to be in town? Stokely Carmichael, you have shook the world. you don't look. One man.
I will
know what I heard one newsman say? He said, we would be glad to have a Carmichael around after Rap Brown. Rap Brown went somewhere the other day and they banned the sale of all matches.
I'll ask you the question anyway. Do you think you would have been treated differently on this draft business had you been
white boy? Yeah. Wrong complexion and wrong connection. Joe Namath had a bad knee. He got out because he was a white boy. He's still playing football. George Hamilton was a millionaire, but he had to support his mama. He started and he got out. But as you say, I'm black and I'm catching the hell.
Do you think Ralph Abernathy can ever take the place of Martin Luther King?
Well, I don't really know. It's up to the people to follow who they want to follow. It's not my job.
Well, Stokely is here. Part of his philosophy is that the only way the black man will get anywhere in America is to burn the place down.
Stokely can speak for himself, and he's not scared, and the world know him, and he's free, so he can speak for himself. He says something, whatever he want to say, he can say.
I came to listen to you. I'm not even speaking to them no more. Go ahead, you rap.
Well, whatever. Well, he speaks for himself, and he says he's not speaking now. So we're not here to debate over. If I disagree with anything he say, if he disagree with anything I say, we'll go behind the doors and argue, but not around you.
Okay, one final question.
We can disagree, but they better not put their hands on you.
Of Muhammad Ali running into Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. They're at Howard University, speaking with a reporter. And in closing, we'd like to thank our guests, Amari Rebel, thank you Denise Lynn, thank you Mary T. Bassett, thank you to our producers, Dr. Gerald Horne, Sister Flora, Sister Femi, Brother Brandon, our board op, Sylvester Rivers, Anthony Ballas, and all those who made today's program possible. This program, as well as prior programs, can be reheard for the next 60 days. Go to kpfk.org audio archives, scroll to Freedom Now. Signing off for Freedom Now, this is Sister Thage, and as always, we stand ready for revolution.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.